Hello and thank you everybody, and welcome to the third session within the 2023 Teaching and Learning Week. This session is the Building Cultural Capabilities in Indigenous Spaces. I would like to begin this session by the acknowledgement of country, and the University of Queensland acknowledges the traditional owners and the custodianships of the lands in which we meet. We pay our respects to their ancestors and to their descendants who continue cultural and spiritual connections to country. We recognise the valuable contributions to Australia and the global society. I would like to acknowledge the traditional owners and elders who have joined us today for this presentation, either as presenters or as people within the audience. So welcome, it's a pleasure to have you here. I'm Tanya Henry, and I'm a learning designer within the Institute of Teaching and Learning Innovation. And I'm joined with a group of people who are going to share how they have been building Indigenous knowledge and Indigenous cultures through courses in which they are teaching, and they've been doing this in a variety of ways, and it's very exciting to introduce them all. Auntie Roma has been instrumental throughout the planning of this session, and she has provided cultural guidance, elder mentorship and preparation guidance. Also joining us is Dr. Sam Coombs, Dr. Gemma Irvine, Dr. Sabine Maktouk, Dr. Lisa Ottenhouse, Lisa, I'm sorry if I've mispronounced that name, Dr. Kathy Keys and Kim Baber. We also have Adriana Diaz and Dr. Samantha Disbray. Each one of these presenters is going to be telling their story of what they have been doing within curriculum across UQ. We're going to do this almost as a conversational style where we ask you all to participate in a collaborative conversation with us. There's going to be an opportunity for each one of the panel's participants to share what they've been doing within this space. There'll be time for questions and answers, of course, because I think that is really important as we move forward within this space. So if you do have any questions, can you please put them into chat, and we'll either get to those at the conclusion of each one of the participants' sessions, once they have shared their information, or at the conclusion of the session overall. We've allowed 10 minutes for questions and answers. Peter Rutherford, one of my colleagues, is joining us in the Zoom, and he is going to be dealing with any technical issues, but also collaborating and bringing together all of those questions that is coming from the audience. So it's fantastic to have you all here and to be participating within that process. Now, the first thing that we're going to do is start with a really important conversation about allyship. This is a term that we've discussed at length as we've come together as a group with this presentation. It's important that we consider what that is and what that means. And many people have actually asked me, what is that? So I'm going to ask Samantha and Gemma to introduce themselves more fully and to talk about what allyship is. Oh, I think I went too far on the slide.
You're right.
Sorry. Have I gone too far?
There should be another slide.
I think, well, I was going to start with the decolonising piece.
Yeah. Well,
okay, fantastic. Let's do
Sorry.
that.
It'd be great if Sam could start, but I think the logic of these two concepts, I'll start. So, hi, I'm Dr. Gemma Irving. I'm a non-Indigenous woman. My father's side is Kiwi, Pakeha, white New Zealander, and then my mum's non-Indigenous Australian. And I've been working with Dr. Samantha Coombs on Indigenising my course, or decolonising my course, I should say, in the business school. So we wanted for this session, so just to give you a bit of history, there was, I think, 5 kind of different sessions pitched all around working in Indigenous spaces and building cultural capability. And Italy's kind of grouped us together in one session and given us an hour. And so we've had to have a lot of conversations among the presenters to work out what we can actually do in this time that's going to be impactful and powerful. In the middle of all this, we were processing the kind of referendum results and all of the process that went with that, and acknowledging that as much as we would love to talk about all the lovely stories of bringing Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander knowledges into our course. We're doing that against the background of racism and of structural disadvantage. And we felt that we couldn't ignore that. But we also didn't want to leave everyone feeling disillusioned, as Linda, I think, spoke to in this morning's session as well. And so the idea here was that Sam and I are going to give you just two tools, two concepts that will help frame this. That's decolonisation and allyship. This is really stuff that Sam has brought to me and has helped me work through. So I'm kind of putting my hand up to talk about one piece, but I do want to acknowledge Sam's role in bringing this to me. And then Sam's going to talk about the allyship piece. And then we're going to open up to the other panelists to kind of share their take on these topics and what they've been doing in their courses. So really exciting to be here. So my story of this concept of decolonising, I just wanted to share this in a really informal conversational way. So at the beginning of this year, I came to the Indigenising the curriculum team in my school and said, I'm really keen on bringing Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander perspectives into my management course. Can you help me? That's where I met Dr. Samantha Coombs. And Sam started talking to me about decolonising. And she said, Gemma, it's not just about indigenising, it's about decolonising, like you're skipping a step here. And look, this was a little bit confronting for me, this idea of decolonising. Like I did have a negative reaction to it. I'm the colonist in this scenario. So, you know, what does that mean about my place in all of this? And I also thought, is it this idea of decolonising knowledge, is that enough? Because surely, like, we've got to go beyond that. But from talking to Sam, she really helped me understand that universities are built predominantly on teaching Western knowledge, and Western knowledge approaches, whatever discipline we're in, are built on this grounding of excluding others. And, you know, those knowledges have been built up in a way to justify colonialism and justify the theft of lands from First Nations people. And so we do need to actually tackle those knowledges and address them, address that kind of head on. Throughout the year, we also had other discussions about the idea of UQ as this elite institution, and that as an elite institution, it's based on this idea of excluding some people and not others. And Sam and some of her colleagues also shared stories with me about other experience of exclusion from other institutions. This is not just education, this is healthcare, this is the criminal justice system. And so this exclusion and this racism is pervasive. So decolonising is about starting to address that. And that's a huge thing. That's really overwhelming. But one thing that we can do at universities in particular is start to decolonise knowledges. And the first step for that involves actually recognising those knowledges, unpicking them, unpacking them, explaining the standpoints that they come from, explaining whose interests they serve. And that's something that as non-Indigenous academics, we can do that work. And it's really important that we can do that work. And it's only once that work is done that we can then bring in the Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander knowledges. The framework, the metaphor that Sam talked to me about, and I know this comes from someone else, so I really have to reference them.
No, it's from my paper.
Oh, it's from Sam's paper. Okay. Found a lot of knowledge. Is this campfire metaphor of the decolonising piece. The first step is about dismantling the cloning ideologies and power structures. And that's clearing the ground for the campfire. You've got to pick up those leaves and those sticks and those dead woods. That's the racism, that's the structural disadvantage, that's the exclusionary systems. You've got to do that work first before we can create a space that's safe to have a campfire where we can all sit around as equals. And the stuff that Mary Graham was talking about this morning, Dr. Mary Graham, about all knowledge as being equal and valid. We've got to clear the ground first before we get to the campfire. The clearing the groundwork though, how the hell do you do that? I mean, that's something that I'm working on. I don't have the answers to, but luckily for me, it's something that Dr. Sam Coombs has been working on and thinking about and has a paper under review on, and that's the allyship piece. And so I'm going to hand over to Sam to speak to that.
Hi, thanks, Gemma. You did really well explaining that. The reason why we talk about allyship is because there's not a lot of I'll introduce myself first. So I'm a Ngunnawal Quandamooka woman and a lecturer within the business school here at the University of Queensland. So the reason why we talk about allyship is because the people that are doing most of this work are not Indigenous people. So they need to be skilled and have the traits that we need to work in this space effectively. I want to start with a quote from Dr. Lilla Watson. If you have come here to help me, you are wasting your time. But if you've come because your liberation is bound up with mine, then let us work together. So that's the kind of approach we want to take to allyship. It's not about one person leading or another person following. It's about people working together for the same cause. So I break allyship down into two broad categories, which I term Binangari and Binangana. So using my Ngunnawal language, Binangari means people who do not think, do not listen, and do not understand. And Binangana are people who do listen, learn, and understand. So in the paper that Gemma is referring to, I break Binangari down into 7 archetypes where potential allies can reinforce either deliberately or inadvertently the colonial contract that Gemma is referring to, which maintains that, that social, political, and economic capital that was established during colonisation. So a Binangana ally is someone who has already done that work and to learn and have often been guided to ensure that they don't fall into the traps of reinforcing that colonial contract. But guidance to work in this space is essential, and a lot of people don't have access to Indigenous elders or colleagues to help them guide their practice. But what I wanted to share today was some of what myself and a few of my Indigenous colleagues consider as the most important characteristics of effective allies working in our space. So in going through this process, it might be good for you all to consider your positionality. How are you connected to this place? How are you connected to the history of this place and colonialism? And how have you benefited from or been harmed by colonialism? Because we do recognise that it's not just Indigenous people that have suffered through colonialism. It's a way of being that has impacted on a lot of diverse peoples. So what is Binangana ally? So it's a term that we use to describe a specific type of allyship that's grounded in respect, humility, and a commitment to decolonisation. Binangana allies understand that they are not the expert on Indigenous studies or issues, and they are committed to listening to and learning from Indigenous people, but they are also committed to using their power and privilege to advocate for Indigenous rights and to challenge racism and discrimination when it occurs. So one of the 7 characteristics that myself and a few colleagues wrote about was this idea of visible commitment. Now, Binangana allies make visible commitment to allyship through actions and words. They speak out against racism and discrimination, and they support Indigenous-led initiatives. This is the kind of person, like when you're reading the comments on a thread on Facebook or Twitter or something, and it's littered with racism against Indigenous people, but you'll see 1 or 2 people pop up and push back against that. They're the Binangana allies, and that's what we want, people that will push back and be obvious in that, and we can see that. They're visible to us. That creates safe places and safe people. But also humility and respect. So Binangana allies are humble and respectful in their interactions with Indigenous people. They recognise that we as Indigenous people are the experts on our cultures and our experiences, and they recognise our leadership across all spaces. They have awareness as well. So they are aware of the issues facing Indigenous peoples and the ongoing impact of colonisation, but they are also aware of their own biases and privileges. Myself, as a light-skinned Indigenous person, I recognise the privilege I carry by not having dark skin. They show curiosity and intelligence and listening. So they listen and they are curious. So, you know, they're curious and they want to know, they ask questions, they listen with an open mind and heart. We talked a lot about that, about the importance of being open and having an open heart and an open mind through this process, because some of the ideas and things are quite confronting and quite challenging. There's cultural intelligence. they have the time and they put their time and effort in to learn about Indigenous cultures and protocols, but they also learn about their own culture and their own protocols and how that impacts at the interface when engaging in Indigenous spaces. So developing that cultural intelligence is not just beneficial for working with Indigenous people, it's beneficial for working with all peoples. And there's this idea of effective collaboration as well. So that's actually sharing power and resources, not just talking about it, but also prioritizing Indigenous voices and perspectives. So if you have two papers to choose from and one's authored by a non-Indigenous person and one's authored by an Indigenous person, you should always give priority to the Indigenous authored work, especially in this space. And lastly, probably one of the most important things is truth-telling and bravery. Truth is a big thing that comes up over and over again in Indigenous spaces. And this is because misinformation has been leveled against us for the last 250 years. So a lot of people will talk about misinformation as a new concept. It is not. It's been going for a very long time. And if you're committed to reconciliation, then you have to be committed to truth-telling. And a part of that is being brave. It's quite frightening to do that, especially in big spaces around a lot of people, to call out those behaviours and to say, well, that's not true. This is the truth. It can be quite frightening and it can put your own self at risk in your career. So truth-telling and bravery is a big part of this process as well, to be an effective ally, to work in decolonisation and to be competent in Indigenous spaces. So, thanks, Tanya.
Excellent. Thank you very much, Sam and Gemma. That was a fantastic overview of what decolonisation and allyship is. And I think that's a great way to start this session.
Can I just make one more comment, Tanya? I forgot to mention
Of course.
This idea of Binangana ally it's a journey, right? So you don't get stuck in Binangara, you don't get stuck in Binangana. It's a constant journey and it takes time, effort, and commitment. And I firmly believe, and a few of the other Indigenous academics, it's the Binangana's job to help guide the Binangari to the place of Binangana. So yeah, sorry, Tanya.
That's okay. Thank you very much for adding that. So Sam and Gemma, before we move to our next presenter, in 2 minutes, and I'm sure you would actually need 2 days to answer this question, but we'll see if we can do it really quickly and briefly. What steps did you initially take to decolonise the course? Once you recognised there was a thing that you had to do, how did you do that?
Can you flick back to the previous slide? That Gemma?
Yes, I can.
Yeah. The image, can you talk to this?
Yeah, I'm happy to talk to this. So in terms of decolonising, we are on the very early stages of a long journey, but one of the first topics we teach in my course is the history of management. So this is a history of our discipline. It only goes back to like 100 years to scientific management. I mean, that's where most of our textbooks start, which in one way is also a problematic assumption that we could critique. But one just really simple activity that we started with was I've just given students a Padlet with this sort of standard history with a portrait and a really brief biography of the key kind of figures that we talk about in the history of management. And I just asked them, how many women, how many men, non-binary, how many people from Europe, Africa, Asia, Australia, and how many people from psychology, unionists, professional backgrounds. And it's really clear this is a very, very much a history dominated by the perspectives of white males from Europe. And so it's not necessarily to demonize those perspectives, but it's to say, look, this discipline is limited and constrained by the fact that it is coming from a very limited perspective. And we actually have to be conscious of that. We have to be conscious of who this is serving. And then we start to bring in some of the concepts around relationality and caring for country from an Aboriginal philosophy perspective and how they might challenge this sort of dominant view of management history. So it's nothing too crazy, but it's the start of opening up students' minds to seeing that there's more than one way of thinking about this history and that it is limited in what it tells us about management. I mean, management is planning, controlling, leading, and organizing, and every culture does that in one way or another. We choose to teach it in this very narrow way. So it's opening students' minds up to that.
Absolutely. Thank you very much. Peter, do we have any burning questions that we need to address or answer to now, or should we wait till the conclusion, like when we actually have time for questions and answers?
Yeah, there's no questions at the present, Tanya.
Okay, fantastic. Thank you. And for everybody online, it would be fantastic to have some interaction. So by all means, put your hand up if you would like to ask some questions, or pop them into chats, because we're here to share examples that we hope that you can take away and use that knowledge within your own teaching practice. I'm going to call on Lisa. Lisa, you've been extremely busy in this space, but can you please share how did you get architecture and engineering students to engage with Indigenous knowledges?
Yeah, thanks, Tanya. And so this really goes a little while back. A collaboration between architecture and engineering was the first, I guess, iteration back in 2019, where we sort of taught collaboratively between the two disciplines. But since I guess this year we really wanted to also have focus on the Indigenous design principles and sort of embedding those knowledges in curriculum. So the brief is really for our students to engage in collaborative design of a bridge, in this case for the Brisbane Valley Rail Trail. And so there's this first component where they learn from each other and learn to speak each other's language between architecture and engineering. But then also really Cassie delivered a really good chunk of content on meaningful, respectful engagement with traditional owners, reframing history to acknowledge First Nations architecture, and also sort of, I guess, the design principles when you do plan a project on someone's country. And I might just let Cassie speak a little bit more to that, to those design principles. Over to you, Kathy.
Hi, my name is Kathy Keys. I'm senior lecturer in the School of Architecture, and I work collaboratively with Kim Baber, who's also attending here, to deliver the architecture half of this course. And we used a range of strategies to get architecture and engineering students who are designing at a time now of climate change and declining resources to engage with Indigenous knowledges. In the first instance, we asked students to reconsider the histories of their profession. So this is part of the decolonising process that Sam was talking about earlier. And basically, what we wanted people to do was to think that, acknowledge that that practicing architecture and engineering in Australia sits within a much longer history, and acknowledging that this country is home to one of the oldest continuous cultures in the world, where climate responsiveness and resource efficiency was a key feature of First Nation structures. So we sort of spent some time talking about the nature of those architectures and structures and some principles around them. We also acknowledged the diversity of First Nation languages and peoples in Australia, and reminded students that all projects, wherever they worked in the world, will take place on Indigenous people's country. Our students, as Lisa said, were siting a bridge in the Brisbane Valley on the traditional lands of the Dungji Jawu, who were part of the Waka Waka cultural group. And these people had interacted within the larger cultural landscape of Greater Moreton Bay region, where before 1800, between 10 to 12,000 Aboriginal people had lived. And so we asked students to consider this site's Indigenous cultural and environmental history. So schemes reflected a critical position regarding best practice for the future management of forest ecologies and how this might translate into sustainable timber construction. So this subject was focused on designing structures with timber, and Kim and Lisa are experts in this field. And I guess the thing to remember is that timber is sourced from locally grown Indigenous trees, and these trees had played an important part in Queensland's building industry, but at great cost to our stands of Indigenous trees. So we introduced the students to the concept of stewardship. specifically forestry stewardship. And we did this through the lens of culture and history, explaining that concepts like this are culturally constructed and understood. So we spoke about the key role Indigenous trees like hoop pine played in the timber building traditions in settler Queensland. We also focused on the culturally significance of the bunya pine. For Aboriginal people, the bunya pine is deeply associated with the ancestors and was held to be sacred. Bunya pines lived for up to 1,000 years, and in terms of Aboriginal stewardship, they were not felled but cared for, with individual trees associated with individual families passed down one generation to the next. We spoke about ongoing cultural continuity in the region, and we asked students to consider that over millennia, the cultural responsibility held by traditional custodians of the bunya had ensured the trees and the surrounding environment were cared for and continued to thrive. The student sites were located right in the middle of a very important cultural landscape, that's ongoing cultural landscape, and we asked them to consider this context when designing their projects. As designers of buildings and cities, students have an opportunity and a responsibility to influence key decisions about material, where they come from, and the impact they have on both the immediate and wider environment. We used the pre- and post-colonial history of forestry stewardship in southeast Queensland to consider the problems that arise between groups of people of different cultural backgrounds if they misunderstand each other's core cultural values and are forced to share landscapes, environments, and resources. As UQ graduate students, will be asked not only to be efficient in their use of resources, but also design and deliver projects in countries, landscapes, and communities where people hold very different beliefs and social and cultural customs around resources and land use to those that they were raised and educated in. We reiterated that as architects and engineers working cross-culturally, it will be important to understand and respect these differences and have a critical position on issues like the environment, sustainability, and cultural difference. Finally, and I think most significantly or most importantly, we introduced students to the importance of designing projects to support cultural sustainability that was inclusive of community engagement. We looked at how cultural sustainability can be leveraged across design projects as a means of improving Indigenous people's agency and involvement in architecture and engineering projects. Thank you.
And maybe to add to that, we also introduced them to the Campuses on Countries framework by Carol Gosen and Kelly Greenup, and I saw Kelly's also on the call, which is just such a good resource to have at UQ.
Fantastic. Thank you, Lisa and Kathy. Kim, did you have anything you would like to add? You're on mute, Kim.
Kathy has given a very comprehensive description of our approaches, and I think the thing that I'd like to add is that working with timber and working in the space of building materials that are grown is a really long-term initiative, and thinking about how we caring for country is a really important factor that you can instill with students from the outset, because decisions that they make about the materials that they work with is part of a legacy that they can leave. So I think that's a really good opportunity there for us to be quite effective.
Yeah, that's great. Fantastic. Beautiful. Thank you very much, Kim. There have been some questions, and one of them is the Campuses on Country resource. That was, people are wondering, what is that? Can you please answer to that? Sam's holding up the book. This is what it is. This is where we get it. We can add that to the chat. I'll add the link in, which is great. Thank you.
Very well written document that sets out some principles, design principles, sets out ways which projects for building can be thoughtfully engaged with Indigenous stakeholders and be led by Indigenous stakeholders. It was written by Indigenous experts from across the University of Queensland, so it really is an excellent resource for for teaching and just for general practice, to be honest.
Absolutely, completely agree. Thank you. And thank you, Lisa, for adding those links into the chat. So if people haven't yet seen those, the links of the resources that have been referred to are within chat. So thank you very much. Do we have any other questions? We have some for the question and answer at the very end. People are jumping in to get into the start of the queue, which I love. Thank you for that. Okay. We are going to push forward because unfortunately we are very short on time. And Sabine, I'm going to ask you a question because in your course you've done something a little bit different from what we've just heard from. You have developed a software app for an Indigenous business. How did you embed the Indigenous cultural perspectives in a software artifact?
Yeah, thank you. I would like to acknowledge first the traditional owners on the land we meet or in that are all present, and respect the elders past and present and emerging. Before I answer your question, I need to say thank you to Auntie Roma, who has been immense support in sharing her knowledge and her wisdom and her Indigenous perspectives with my students as the business owner of the project we have created. But I would also like to acknowledge Ashel Ranpanra, who's the manager for work integrated learning in the Bell faculty, because this course was for many years a work integrated learning course. And we have worked with businesses in delivering this software app to allow students to enhance their employability, but also to give back to the communities. When in a conversation with Alisa Milonos, which is the second person I need to think for in initiating my journey, because I'm a non-Indigenous woman with a background as a German background. I did know very little, and she connected me and Ashel as well with Auntie Roma, and from her I learned a lot. And the knowledge we had is subjective perspectives, and the challenge was how we can translate this in the software. And throughout Auntie Roma sharing the challenges of Indigenous netball girls who were the users of the software app, the students learned about the importance of decolonization and also the importance of symbols and colors. So the software app, and you see two screenshots here, initially students were very ambitious, and the course has about 200, over 200 students creating that software app, and they were just Googling anything with Indigenous pictures, Indigenous symbols, and were uploading this into the app. And through mindfully engaging in understanding Indigenous values, students realized that there are nuanced differences and that not every picture could be taken from any source, and also that would need to be mindfully represented. So the way how you can embed Indigenous perspectives and knowledge is by carefully thinking about the symbols you use and the images you include. The other very important knowledge for the students were the color. I already mentioned that. And here Auntie Roma shared the importance or the meaning of the symbol. And I know it's very small on the screenshot, but in the top left corner, you see a netball, but it has also additional Indigenous meanings. The colors have a representation, and the design, which is Auntie Roma's design, has a meaning as well. So we produced, in the students grown their knowledge throughout this, because it was very, I have to say, it was an immense learning journey for the students, because those 200 or more than 200 students have had previously very little knowledge about Australia in general. And then in addition about the Indigenous or the Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people, because the students in my classroom come from overseas, mainly Southeast Asia. And so for them, building the connections and that relational engagement was immense to see. Maybe Auntie Roma, would you like to add and extend here?
Oh, thank you, Sabine. I wasn't prepared to actually say anything. I thought you were going to deliver the whole thing. But thank you very much. And yes, I do want to say that I was absolutely floored at the dedication and the commitment of the students to not just get this right in the technical way, but also to really appreciate the need to have the meaning of what this meant to me and my organisation, and to have, as Sabine mentioned, all of the right representations there. They took this into their hands with such, and I know the word passion is used too much these days, but just such passion and desire to not just do this for themselves as a course, but also to make sure that they were doing this to make it meaningful for me. Whereas, you know, as we all know, a lot of students just try to get through the courses and just do as much as they can to get the, you know, get through the course. But that they were so caring. Each and every student that I actually interacted with, all of them just really wanted to do well, not just in the curricular part of this, but also personally for themselves. So I also thank Sabine for I don't know, just the way she conducted the course, and Ash, who was our middle person. So Sabine and Ash, I really appreciate the way that you also help, you know, put the course together and made sure that me and the students had a really good relationship as well. So yeah, it was just, I was absolutely really amazed at the way that Sabine and Ash conducted this course. And I've been involved in other courses too, where I've just never had this engagement with the students as much. I have had really good engagement, just the amount of engagement in this was just phenomenal. And yes, it made it a very good experience for me too, not just the students. So thank you. And that's, yeah, I hope that's helped with, yes, really, I think the most important thing here is that when Aboriginal or Torres Strait Islander people are engaging in anything with the community, it's the way that we approach it too, and the way that we start our relationship with the people involved in any projects or any communications, any dialogues. It's how we approach it first, because, you know, sometimes there is that pushback also with, as has been mentioned before, about, you know, the racism part of things, and people also not knowing anything about the culture, and that makes them scared also to engage with it, and to engage with the people. So I think also I like to think that myself and the way that I actually introduced myself and introduced my culture to the students, I think that helped as well. So there's that two-way reciprocal caring, and yes, and that creates a really good relationship and meaningful collaborations.
Thank you. And the students are grateful for it. I've seen them in person coming again and asking how the app is going and how the netball girls are using it. So they were truly and deeply appreciated of what you shared with us. So I'm personally grateful, but the students were as well. Thank you.
Excellent. Thank you, Sabine and Auntie Roma. That's a fantastic example of working together with Indigenous and non-Indigenous staff to bring outcomes that benefit everybody involved, the teaching staff, Indigenous community, but also the students, so that they're able to have that knowledge and move forward with that space, which is fantastic. It's great to see. Thank you very much. Adriana and Samantha, you have been doing some fantastic work within the School of Languages and Cultures. Would you like to share what you have been doing within this space, please?
Sure, I think I can get started, and then maybe Samantha, you can jump in, please. So I guess we come to this session from a slightly different space. We haven't yet, or what we're presenting today is not the work that we've done with students, but rather with colleagues in the school. So in my role as Director of Teaching and Learning, and in Samantha's role as Director of Indigenous Engagement, I guess what we are trying to show here today is the kind of synergies that can be created between those roles in coming together as a school as well, and engaging with our colleagues to begin the process that Gemma and Sam described in terms of how do we engage with those decolonial ideas in the first place before we even approach the changes or innovation in the curriculum. So Samantha and I delivered a workshop in September where we sort of facilitated a space for conversation, and you can see some of the questions that we posed to our colleagues. Samantha, would you like to talk about the 3 entry points that we talked about in the workshop?
Yeah, thanks, Adriana. Just a quick thank you to the participants in the talk so far, because we're talking about synergies, sharing knowledge and building knowledge among colleagues, and I'm really grateful to have been involved in this and to have heard all of your talks today, and also taken part in the planning for this session, because it's here that we just learn best, I think. So in our context, the School of Languages and Cultures, we have a range of colleagues who teach foreign languages. Just on the side, but I won't take time for it. We're also developing with my colleagues, Des Crump and Robert McClellan, Indigenous Industry Fellows, a language revitalisation program in the school. So we are attendant to the languages of this land, and that's fairly recent, belated, but there's really interesting work that Rob and Des and other Indigenous colleagues in the school are doing. But the focus of the work that Adriana and I have been working together on is aimed at all of those language teachers of Russian, of Korean, of Japanese, a range of languages, Spanish in our school, and really starting to explore the pathways for how Indigenising languages and cultures curriculum can be achieved in those disparate languages. And so we've really started opening the space, and through the 3 entry points that Adriana's mentioned, and that is, how can Indigenous perspectives appear in languages curriculum, and not in tokenistic ways, but in meaningful ways. And that's where we're looking for those synergies with our colleagues as well. How can they appear out? How could content, Indigenous content, occur in other languages curricula, and approaches to teaching, approaches to assessment. I was just in the session this morning with Professor Tracy Bunda and colleagues looking at storying, all of these methods that can flow into to other curriculum areas and other learning areas. So we started off with these 3 entry points, and we're exploring those with our colleagues. I'll hand it back, Adri.
Great, thank you, Samantha. Yes, so the questions that you see there are very much for the kind of long-term conversations we envisage happening in future months as well within the school. So we've just literally started opening up those spaces. And as you can imagine, with the wide range of languages, and mostly imperial languages that we teach in our school, these are conversations that really require a lot of time. But I think we have some another slide coming up in which we wrap up some of these ideas too. So I'm mindful of the time and possible questions coming up. So I'll hand it back to Tanya.
Beautiful. Thank you, Adriana and Samantha. Appreciate you sharing your knowledge in this space and understanding what you have been doing. It's fantastic work. When we were planning this session, it was interesting because there's so many fabulous examples of what has been taking place across UQ, but there were 3 key messages that everybody who has presented today thought was really important that were shared across within this session. And those messages are to be courageous and to accept that this is actually going to be an uncomfortable place for many of us who, whether you're Indigenous or not Indigenous, I think we've all got a lot of work to do in this space. We need to focus on the process and relationships, and I think that is incredibly important. Without good connections and great relationships, it's very challenging to work in this space of indigenising the curriculum and understanding cultures and working together, but also recognising that everything is context specific. So what you've seen as examples here may not work wholeheartedly for what you are doing in your own courses. So you will need to take and adapt little pieces accordingly. Would anybody from the panel like to expand on any of the key messages that we have come together with? Everybody's very quiet.
I just wanted to share something, Tanya, and I just wanted to publicly thank you as well for leading us in the process of coming to the session today, because I think the regular meetings that we held with the whole team really try to embody everything that's represented here in creating those conversations and the spaces in which we can listen to each other, learn from each other, agree on how we're going to do something. And this really couldn't have happened if we had done a sort of more traditional 5 minutes each presentation, as perhaps we had initially thought. So I think working within the constraints of the colonial system, the institution, is one of the things that became clear straight away as we came together into this space, and how we were trying to stretch those spaces and really be respectful and mindful of what we are actually trying to share with our colleagues.
Yes, excellent. Thank you very much, Adriana. I think it's we should look through. I know there's a lot of questions that have been discussed within the chat. So thank you, Adriana, for your thoughts and for sharing that. Peter, I know you're keeping a close eye on the chat. Would you like to discuss or repose that question? No?
Yes, yes, I'm just scrolling back up. I'll grab it.
Sorry, Peter, I caught you off guard.
Here we go.
There's a question about the campfire metaphor. Is that the question you're looking at, Peter? Sam, a number of people have commented that they would really like to be advised when your paper is released. So if you could please let us know. I'm happy to share across if possible.
Yeah, that's no problem. Is that the allyship paper or the campfire paper? Because they're 2 different papers.
I don't know. People have just said papers, so let's go with both.
Sam is very prolific. Just like keep an eye on her eSpace record, and you'll see there'll be like probably 10 papers by next year. But yet the allyship paper, I think, is what people are talking about. I found it personally so helpful. I keep going back to it and reflecting on my own actions. And as Sam said, this is a huge journey. So yeah, well, I'll make sure Sam probably won't self-promote, but I will make sure that this paper gets out there, because I think it's been so valuable for me, and everywhere we go and talk about this stuff, people are really keen to hear about it. So we'll follow up with Italy somehow, and maybe it can get into a newsletter or something. I'll make sure it does, because I know Sam won't.
Yeah, there you go. Gemma will.
Okay, excellent. Thank you. We do have a question, which is colonial thought is inherently gendered and classist, and the established canon of other decolonizing contexts, such as what's happening in South Asia, have not been fully addressed until recently. How can we bring this nuance into our discussions and teaching practices?
I'll have a crack at this. Look, I'm very, very new to the concept of decolonizing and decolonial thinking. I can only speak from my own discipline in management that there has been this huge uptick in this conversation, and it is a global conversation. Management as a discipline, more so than, I know there's been comparisons with medicine and law, is heavily skewed towards American and British, and to a lesser extent European perspectives. So there's really a global movement across, particularly Africa's very active in this area, South America, and our Indigenous colleagues, First Nations colleagues in Canada and Australia, in talking about what this means in our perspective. I think reflecting back on Auntie Mary Graham's comments this morning about place being important, and thinking about what this conversation means for us right here in this place. And the only other thing I can suggest in terms of my thinking in this, and I'm not saying I'm an expert by any means, is we are so lucky at UQ. We have a diverse range of people from all over the world. And I have started this conversations with my students by getting their perspectives on what did you want to learn about, who are the leaders and organizations and people in your context that are doing this work that might be an alternative way into thinking about this discipline, and kind of delving into the trove of their knowledge and really helping them to see that there's not one way to look at this. Everyone brings something that has value. Yeah, but if others have deeper thoughts on this question, more than happy for them to jump in.
I think the biggest thing is that colonialism just didn't happen just to Indigenous people, it's happened to all people. So if you are able to reflect on how colonialism has benefited and harmed yourself, and to build that standpoint and that positionality, it'll really help you to unpack how that is maintained and reinforced in everyday actions. So yeah, I hope that answers the question.
Thank you, Sam and Gemma, for answering. That's great. We have a few minutes left. We've got 8 minutes until we're going to move on to the next Teaching and Learning Week session. So does anybody else have a question they would like to put into chat or ask by turning your mic off or turning your mic on, unmuting yourself? No? A number of resources were mentioned by the people within the session today, and Peter has kindly put them on into the chat, and they are also available visually on the screen. There is a Padlet that has been put together, which is a combination of all of the resources that are on the screen, as well as some resources that Adriana and Samantha has used, which you're welcome to access. So thank you very much for that.